Last episode, we were talking about finding the golden mean. This is Aristotle's attempt to get us to look at the situation and ourselves in order to find the appropriate response on a spectrum of possible responses. But there's a question that the doctrine of the mean quietly assumes an answer to. Appropriate to what standard? And who set that standard? A person raised in a society that treats certain people as inferior to others will of course develop a sense of what's normal and what is appropriate that reflects the values of their society. Their moral compass would be calibrated by their culture. And if the culture is wrong about something really important, then everyone inside that culture's compass will be off. And the person who uses it might not even be able to know that their compass is off. This episode then is going to be about the relationship between personal ethics and the societies that ultimately shape them. This is why Aristotle thought that you couldn't fully understand the one without some sort of understanding of the other. Welcome back to American Socrates. I'm Matt Rupert. I think to begin, we need to understand the political animal. Aristotle's claim that human beings are by nature political animals is perhaps one of the most famous and most understood ideas of his. He doesn't mean that people are naturally interested in elections or legislation or government or things like that. What he means is probably something much more fundamental, that human beings are the kinds of creatures who really can only fully develop as themselves, individually here, and flourish within their communities. We're going to need our society to tell us who we are and to help distinguish us as individuals. We can't be taken out of that. I think a lot of us have the understanding that a society is in some ways a collective noun for a bunch of individuals. Certain citizens come together and they form a state, something like that. But the opposite is also equally true here in Aristotle's estimation of this. A society may be made up of nothing but individuals, but individuals are really nothing if they're not a member of a society. You can't be individuated and all on your own. That doesn't make you an individual, that makes you a society of one. So we're not self-sufficient individuals then, in Aristotle's opinion. We can't choose simply who to associate with. Nobody comes into the world this way. We're all born into families. We're born into communities that already exist and already have norms and rules and moralities and perspectives and knowledge and science. It's all there by the time we arrive. So we're social by nature. And the community is not something that's added on to human life. It is the vital condition of it. The evidence that Aristotle's going to offer for this is pretty clear, I think. Language, he says, is social. It only exists between people and only makes sense in a shared context. Virtue is also social. Things like courage, justice, generosity, all of those things are going to require other people in order to be made meaningful. Even the contemplative life that we discussed a few episodes ago requires a community that provides those conditions for it. You have to have a certain amount of security, a certain amount of education, a certain amount of leisure time. You have to have a body of accumulated knowledge before anyone can really lead the contemplative life. The lone individual, fully isolated, is not living a human life, not in the full sense. They're more like an animal or like a god, as Aristotle says. Those who can live outside of human society are either beasts or gods. The practical consequence then of this is that your ethics and your politics are not separate things. We tend to separate them today. Even in like academic philosophy, they tend to be thought of as completely different departments or different topics to be thought about. Ethics is over here, politics is over there, and the two don't really interact that much. But for Aristotle especially, that's not true. I often think that he believes ethics fits you into your society the way a hand is fitted to its glove. But your society, of course, is made up of the individuals who enact it, who bring it to life. And so those social values then end up becoming based on those ethics, the individual's ethics. So the kind of person you become is going to be shaped by the community that you live in. It's shaped by its norms, it's shaped by its institutions, the expectations of the people around you, even like the stories we tell ourselves. Stories like what a good life ultimately looks like. What is someone who deserves respect? What does it mean to be valued in your community? And the kind of community you live in is ultimately shaped by the collective decisions about what to value and how to organize common life. Each is going to shape the other then. You can't get your personal ethics fully right while being entirely indifferent to the society that formed you and continues to form you. To bring this back to the good life, you can't have a good life inside a rotten society any more than you could have a good society made up of nothing but rotten individuals. So let's dig into that idea that ethics really fits the person to their society. Aristotle's ethics isn't supposed to be a universal code handed down from somewhere outside of human life. These are not commandments from on high. It's an account of how a person ultimately develops a sense of excellence, the virtues that allow them to live and function really well within their human community. The virtues that he ultimately identifies, like courage and justice and wisdom and generosity and joy and a whole bunch of others, are the traits that allow a person to contribute to and to really thrive within a shared social life. This means that Aristotle's ethics is always ethical for a particular kind of person in a particular kind of community. The virtues are not arbitrary. They're not universal either. They track genuine human goods, but their specific expression depends on the context in which they are played out. Another way to say this is that they're ultimately culturally relative. Each culture is going to build its set of goods, and your job as an ethical person is to live up to the standards of your society. So what courage looks like for a soldier is going to be very different from what it looks like for a parent or for a whistleblower or for many other roles within a society. And then those are going to look different entirely between different societies. Generosity would be the same way. Generosity for a wealthy person might look very different for it is for someone with limited resources. The structures here are supposed to be universal, but the content is very particular. The fitting function of ethics, then, that fitting the person into the community, is what makes this a practical theory of ethics. It gives us something to aim at that is connected to your actual life, to your real life relationships. It generally comes in the form of roles, as I was kind of saying earlier. Like if you're a parent, you have a certain sort of relationship to certain other individuals, and therefore a certain set of obligations and manners in which you were supposed to treat them. So it's not an abstract ideal floating above and beyond everything else. This is not justice in a big, shiny, abstract sense. Justice comes in the way that we treat other people in our society. Whether they're good people or bad people, that doesn't matter. You have to treat both of them with justice. But this whole system also creates a certain sort of vulnerability. If the community's norms are themselves defective, then ethical formation that's produced by this system is going to be equally defective. A person excellently fitted to a bad society has been excellently fitted to something that is bad. And so they themselves, in a certain sense, are still going to be bad. That's not a tiny problem. That is a really big problem for Aristotle, and he knows it. It's a part of why he's going to insist that the ethics and the politics can't be fully separated. He ends the Nicomachean Ethics with the idea that we now have to start over and have this conversation again in terms of politics. Because without an understanding of our politics, what is the right things for our society to believe in? What is the right things for us to do? What is the right way for us to behave? We're not going to have good virtue. We're not going to have good ethics. Okay, so if ethics asks us how to live well within a given society, politics is going to ask us something that comes, I think, a little prior to that. What makes a society good in the first place? What should our community really value? How should it be organized? What kind of human beings should it be trying to produce? If individuals create societies by organizing them, then societies create individuals by producing them. They're individual factories. They produce ethics. They produce a certain mindset that ultimately creates the individuals who inhabit it. For Aristotle, then, this is not a question about power or procedure, who gets to decide or how the laws get made. It's not about that. This is a substantive question about human flourishing. A good political community is one that creates the conditions for its members to develop and exercise their capacities to the fullest extent. This is how eudaimonia ultimately lives. A bad political community is one that stunts, distorts, or suppresses human development, even if it does so effectively and stably. So let me make this a little more concrete by giving you an example. If you grow up in a racist society, where racism is the norm, it's the tradition, it has a long established history of it, you're not going to know whether you're being racist or not, because your compass is off. So you're going to look at certain situations and you're going to judge them through this racist lens, which is going to make it incredibly difficult for you to tell whether what you're doing is racist or not, or something you're observing is racist or not. If we look at this situation then purely from the point of view of the doctrine of the mean, from this ethical framework that we've been looking at and building here, it's going to be off. The golden mean is going to tell you you should be an excellent racist. Your society values racism. And so you should be at least somewhat racist. You don't want to be excessive about it. You don't want to be so racist that you offend everybody. But you don't want to be so not racist as to offend the racists. And so, therefore, you should be the right amount of racist. Just saying it sounds wrong. The idea here is that the norm of your society is what needs questioning, not your individual response to it. So these people are not necessarily being wrong because they are going against the norms of their society. The problem is that their society has the wrong kind of norms. And so you can see in this example how the politics fits within the ethics and the ethics shapes the politics. In essence, then, politics, at least for Aristotle, is really a moral enterprise. It's not some sort of value-neutral administration of certain ideas. It's a collective project for deciding what kind of human life is worth living and then arranging our common institutions in order to support those ideas. The politician, in Aristotle's sense, is not a manager of competing interests. They're a moral architect whose decisions are ultimately going to shape the kind of people their community produces. Again, I think we get this very wrong in America. I think that one of the things that we make a major mistake about is the idea of the marketplace of ideals. As if all ideals should always be accepted because, maybe some are right and some are wrong. That's not politics. To have that as an ideal for politics is absolutely 100% wrong. There have to be a place where you can say, nope, that's wrong. We're not doing that. And anybody who does it gets punished. And so if there's no place for that, then we can't have this completely free market of ideals where things like racism and sexism and fascism are just allowed to flourish because they're just ideals to be shared and thought about and considered. They're not. They're part of the arena, not the marketplace, the arena of ideas, in which some ideas have to be struck down and destroyed. And the connection here to ethics is pretty direct too. Political decisions that set the conditions within which the ethical formation happens means that we're creating people's ideals through policy decisions, through laws, through government practice. The society decides what is honored and what is stigmatized, what is taught in schools and what is ignored. Whoever has access then to what opportunities and on what terms you can do ultimately can control the society. These decisions shape the moral imaginations of everybody who gets raised up in them. And you can't opt out of that formation. You can only, like maybe later on and with significant effort, try to examine it and decide what you can keep for yourself. But as you grow up, dependent as a child in your society, there's no way to question any of this. There's no way to assert your individuality or your own sense of the world. You don't have the money. You don't have the time. You don't have the resources. No one will take you seriously. And so the best you can do is wait. Wait to grow up. I want to make sure that in this episode, I'm not coming off as too politically partisan. The critique of social formation that I'm trying to give here, that I think comes out of Aristotle, could be applied equally to all sorts of communities and societies, right? Of every political orientation. You're going to have right-wing conservative communities that are going to produce a certain set of distortions that they're not going to be able to see. They're not going to be able to work around because they can't even notice them. But liberal communities are going to produce the same kinds of distortions, different ones, but the same kinds of things. Leftist, progressive communities are going to produce their own set of distortions on this as well. And the reason for that is that these are structural elements of the way individuals and societies work together. They are not given to any particular ideology. It's not an ideological component. And so you're going to find these sort of structural elements no matter what community you have, whatever its ideology may be. So if Aristotle's ethics fit the person to their society, and if the society's norms are themselves unjust, then a person who achieves excellent ethical formation by Aristotle's standard has been excellently formed in this unjust direction. The virtues that they ultimately develop then, having been calibrated to a defective standard, is going to have major implications for their ability to achieve a good life. Their practical wisdom will read situations accurately, but only accurate according to the norms of the community in which those norms were developed. And if those norms are wrong, they're going to have problems. I've already given the example of a racist society, but just to show it exists in multiple ways and in multiple dimensions, I want to give a couple more. A society that defines success entirely through economic productivity will produce people who are excellently fitted to that definition. People who are hardworking, people who are competitive, people who are incredibly efficient, while systematically underdeveloping their capacities for things like friendship or contemplation or care and other things that Aristotle thinks are absolutely essential to a sense of eudaimonia. In other words, capitalism itself in a capitalist society can actually push us away from achieving a good life simply by focusing all of our energies on these material gains. The ethical formation is still real, but the standard that it's calibrated to is woefully incomplete. A society that treats certain kinds of work as beneath our dignity or our respect will ultimately produce people who internalize a sense of hierarchy. They're going to feel genuine shame at doing certain kinds of labor or other people might feel genuine contempt for the people who do it. The house cleaners of the world, the janitors, the burger flippers, the baristas are all essential people, and we need them, and they're useful. But for some reason, we kind of shit on them. We think that they're less than, that they're not really important. Those feelings are ethically formed responses to the values of our society. They're also wrong. The formation produces a genuine disposition that points in a bad direction. We feel oriented towards believing these things because this is what our society seems to deem important. And yet we don't question that as we try to fit in with our society, as we try to succeed. We tell ourselves that, God, I don't want to be a janitor. What a terrible job. I got to do anything I can to not be that person. As if we don't need janitors, as if we don't need garbage collectors, as if we don't need people who kill chickens. We need these people in our society. And instead of valuing their labor for all the good things that it brings about for us, we crap on it. Another way to think about this is a society organized around a particular religious, ethnic, or ideological identity will tend to produce people whose practical wisdom is excellent within that identity and very, very poor across the boundaries of that identity. These are people who can read really well the in-group situation. They're perfectly accurate when it comes to pleasing and appearing correctly and performing virtuously what their in-group expects of them. But anyone who's not in that in-group, anyone in the out-group, they're going to view through a distorted lens, they're going to falter, they're going to make mistakes. That's going to create a sense of anxiety in them whenever they have to deal with anyone who isn't just like them. It's the impetus for why certain groups demand that everyone be, Christian or straight or, white, that their culture is the right way to do things and everybody else is somehow doing it wrong. It's because of this. They have really poor abilities to deal with anything other than trying to live up to the standards of their in-group. So again, the capacity here is real, but the scope has been artificially limited in such a way that they cannot seem to look outside of that box. In each of these cases, the problem is the same. They're ethics without politics, and that's a formation without any kind of examination. We're not really leading the examined life here. We're not really contemplating things. We're just sort of going along with whatever our society told us to do and trying to figure out how to fit within it the best we can. That's not critical thinking, guys. It's not at all. That is simply following the script and using the best parts of your mind to just fit in as well as you can. So, as you attempt to balance this idea of ethics and politics, Aristotle does have a kind of solution that he sort of gestures at. He doesn't fully develop it in terms of modern readers' sense of satisfaction. But that is that ethics and politics are going to have to cooperate together in some kind of corrective loop. Ethics without politics produces very well-formed people who never ask whether the form that they're trying to mold themselves to is actually a good one worth having. They're excellent by the standards of their community and have no framework at all for questioning the standards from outside of their community. Their practical wisdom is very, very real, but it's incredibly limited in its scope. They are, in the deepest sense, products of their environment rather than examined agents within their environment. They have to break out. They have to break the mold in order to become that. On the other hand, politics without ethics produces structural reform that doesn't really change anybody. You can have a change in the laws, a change in the institutions, and formal norms without changing the moral imaginations of the people who operate within them. which is why political change so frequently disappoints us. We can create all these laws against racism, but it doesn't make people any less racist. The institution changes. The people running it bring the same formation that they always had. And the results are pretty predictable. What the corrective loop looks like then in practice is supposed to be something like ethics is asking you to live well by the standards available to you, while politics asks you to examine whether those standards are themselves good. We should all be engaging in these questions. Every single one of us should be forced to engage in both political and ethical questions all the time. That's how we learn, that's how we grow. The two questions are not, of course, the same, and neither one is going to fully substitute for the other. A person who only asks the ethical questions, how do I live well within my community, never really questions their community. They end up becoming pretty authoritarian. They end up following whatever the leaders of their society tell them is the right way to think about things, to interpret things, so on and so forth. A person who asks only the political questions, like what should my community value, may have very sophisticated, usually left-wing views about social organization, while not themselves living up to anything like those standards. The person Aristotle is actually describing then, when his system works well, kind of does both. They figure out how to do both. They take seriously the ethical project of developing genuine virtues while remaining capable of politically questioning those virtues and developing the best ones. That capacity to be formed by a community while retaining the ability to evaluate the formation is itself a kind of practical wisdom. It requires engagement and distance, belonging and critical perspective. This is incidentally part of what the contemplative life from earlier episodes was looking for in us. It's the habit of genuinely thinking, of working problems through rather than simply accepting either received answers or questioning everything to the point that you are simply a rebel for rebel's sake. So to bring this back to the level of the individual, you need to remember you were formed by a community that you didn't choose. You were thrust into it, thrown into it, as Heidegger would say. You're in this society and you find yourself here and you just have to deal with the situation you landed in. Examining that formation is part of the political dimension of personally living a good life. You have to engage politically. You have to ask questions like, is this the best way to be doing things? If not, you're neglecting at least half of your moral existence. The examined life has both an ethical and a political dimension. The ethical dimension is developing genuine virtues, becoming someone of real character, not just someone who performs virtue in a signaling kind of way. But the political dimension is asking whether the virtues that you're developing are calibrated to any kind of moral worth, a standard worth that is universal, that we would choose if we had that choice. Both questions are necessary, neither one is sufficient. So, to wrap up, let me leave you with this question. What values do you hold that you really never have examined? They've just been accepted since the beginning. They feel like bedrock to you. They've come with the territory of where you and maybe how you were raised. I'm not asking you to discard any of these, but simply to look at them directly and decide, as an adult, with your own capacity for judgment, are they all worth keeping? Thanks for tuning in to American Socrates. If today's episode of Philosophy got you thinking in new ways, make sure to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. New, full episodes drop every Wednesday. If you enjoyed the show, leave a review. It helps others find us, and it means a lot. And if you know someone who could use a little more practical wisdom in their life, share this episode with them. Until next time, keep questioning everything.